I really resonate with the work you're doing and the reason you have this show. And I think so much of what I passionately talk about, which, as you said, is empathy, is reconnecting people, finding ways to connect, comes to life through exactly what you're trying to do with the show. So, as you said, I'm originally from the UK, but I've been living in Asia and the Middle East for nearly 20 years, for the majority of my adult life. So, when people ask me, where are you from? I always find that really hard to answer because I'm like, well, I know where my passport is from, right? My passport is British, but my soul, my family, my life, as I said, has been in the East for, for 20 years. So I think I'm a bit of a global citizen by now. And India is a huge, huge part of my life. So the fact that we can have this conversation between Malaysia, where I live, and India, where you live, is a real honor.
Was that like, how long was that you did this keynote speaking event in Bangalore?
So that one, normally they're about an hour. I normally stay for
No,
two.
no, when was this? From which year
Oh,
did
when was it? That was 2022, I think. About 3 years ago.
okay.
Yeah, 3 or 4 years ago. And as I said, now I feel my work has evolved quite a lot in those years in terms of how I work with audiences and how I present, how I show up, how everything. Because every time I go somewhere, I learn, right? And I learn better for next time. Even if we talk about saris, right? For anyone listening who's never worn a sari, it is not easy, right? A sari is like 5 meters long. I don't think most non-sari wearers know this, right? That when you unwrap a sari, it's like as long as your room, and you unwrap it and you're like, how on earth am I going to wear this, right? And then you have to learn, that you need pins and obviously the undergarments you wear, and it's a learning experience, right? When you lean into new people's cultures, and that for me is, as I said, it's what I learn. The first time maybe I don't have all the right things, and I have to run around hotels and borrow pins because I
Yeah.
didn't bring my own pins. But of course, by the third time, the fourth time, I have lots of boxes of pins, and right? You learn, and you learn who to ask for help. I learned in Colombo. I do a lot of work in Sri Lanka. That nearly weirdly, every hairdresser will have a sari dresser, right? So I didn't know that, right? Because why would I? So when I got there, I was like, who's going to help me wear this sari? Because again, for people that don't wear saris and are listening, often people will dress you. There is someone called a sari dresser who puts it on for you because it's difficult. And I learned in Colombo, if I need a sari dresser, I should ask the hairdressers because they will have someone in nearly every hairdresser. So everywhere you go, you learn, and then you grow, and then you learn again, and then you keep going.
You're right. I think also like the sari is also evolving in itself because now we have sari drapers and that's altogether a different business. It's
Yes.
not just a small thing like this, a lady coming and doing your makeup. A sari is become, it is a significance of who we are, but we also want to be very lavish in that. So that
Mm.
has changed over the time. But yeah, I'm really glad that you could really enjoy doing that because I think it is a process that might just make you more, how do I say, if you have a day, an event like what where you were in Bangalore, I think it is quite possible to be a little bit distracted with all the things around you because moving in a sari, like draping is one, right? If you're standing at one place, no problem. But if you had to move and interact with the audience on stage, but people are watching, I think you need to be so careful of how you look, right? It's a very difficult outfit, completely different than abaya.
Yeah, you learn to move differently,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, you're
You
right.
definitely do. And then, you have great empathy for different women and different cultures around the world, right? And how other women feel, right? And how other women carry themselves. And, we wear the abaya. So many of the abayas that you wear in formal occasions are extremely heavy. They're
Yeah.
beautiful. But of course, the Gulf is a very hot place. So until you start wearing that, and then you have your head covered and heavy kind of almost like coats,
Mhm.
and then you realize, my gosh, and it's like 45 degrees outside, right? It's a different way of thinking because then you change the way you think. And the other thing I learned, which is amazing, there is a reason that women across the Gulf, if you watch women walk in the Gulf, they kind of float. They're quite regal, right? They walk beautifully. They never rush. And then you wear the abaya and you know why. Because if you're going to rush, you're going to fall over. So you have to learn to walk different, right? And just like you said, move different when you're in a sari. Like if you wear a sari to a wedding and then people are dancing and you want to dance, you dance different in a sari than you do in a Western dress. So all of these things are here that you learn when you cross cultures, which is it's a gift, really, I think.
Well, I mean, you've been around Indians and in India for quite some time, and that is where you also got your book called Empathy at Work. Okay, let's talk a little bit about that. What is the context of that? How did you come up with that? Because that is really tailored for Indian businesses, right?
Yeah, that was my second book. It was a book that it came from my first book actually. So it's a lot of the core substance is from my first book, and I wanted to republish it, re-edit it, recreate it for the Indian market. So that's what I did. I found a publisher. We wrote it and edited it together from India. Phenomenal man in Mumbai. The publishers are 75 years old, so it's a family business. And yeah, it did really well. It sold nearly 2,000 copies when it launched. And I'm coming, as you know, in a couple of weeks, and we're going to do like a another sort of official launch, even though it launched a few months ago. And yeah, it's nice. It's nice to have something that I can present to India as a gift to India, to prove that I'm serious about the work I do there and just about the potential of India as a country. It's a phenomenal place.
I know, yeah. I think, but then I'm trying to understand what is it? Why India? Um, because you've been like in South Africa, Johannesburg for quite some time. You've also been in the Gulf. But then what is it that you were inspired to really have this book for Indians, the Indian businesses? Is there that because you've not lived in India?
No, I've not lived in India, but I feel that my soul is from India. I often say to people, I'm just so comfortable in India and with Indian people. As I've built my own teams along this journey, they tend to be they over-index on Indian teammates, Indian perspectives. Um, Most of my friends, wherever I live in the world, seem to be Indian. I just have like a real resonance with the country. I
Yeah.
find great peace there. I find great joy. I love many places. I mean, if I spoke about Oman, I would probably speak with almost equal passion. I just absolutely adored it last week. I love discovering cultures, but India has always been, yeah, as I said, in my soul somehow. And, I think the great thing about being an entrepreneur is that you get to choose where you want to grow your business.
Mm.
You're in a corporate where someone else has already chosen where their lead markets are. So I can choose my own lead markets. And I want to do business in India. So that's what I'm going to do.
I think it's also I think the language plays maybe an important role because I think in India, Indians speak the business language is English.
Yeah, that helps for
That
sure.
helps, right? But it's also like, which also means that you've observed, noticed a lot of things in Indian businesses. And that probably also helps in writing a book about it all together.
Yeah, and of course, everywhere you go, India included, has its own business culture.
Yeah.
It takes time. It does take time. I've been working with Indian business people for maybe 20 years now, but I remember in the beginning, it is very different, right? When you really work in Indian businesses with Indian people versus meeting Indians in other countries, it is culturally very different. If you go into a big meeting room in India with many people, there's a lot of noise in an Indian meeting room, right? There's a lot of talking. There's a lot of what you could understand as arguing. They're not arguing, but you wouldn't necessarily know that when you're very new. There's a lot of hierarchies. There's a lot of unsaid things. There's a lot of things that are said like this, but they actually mean that, right? So you have to learn those things. I learned them a very long time ago, but I think it makes it a very unique place to do business. But I think also Indian people are uniquely hospitable people. Wherever I go, people constantly inviting me to meet their parents. I love that. They're like, Mimi, you must come and meet my parents. I'm like, sure.
Really? Oh,
So yeah, it's a phenomenal place.
Well, I mean, India is a diverse country, right? Within India, we have so many different cultures, really, from state-wise. That's another thing. I'm sure you have noticed that south, north, you have really different work cultures, right? And I think to notice that is, which means I'm sure you have traveled within India as well for work.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of travel.
Yeah. What does leading with empathy look like for managing culturally diverse teams? Like you've seen that, you've seen it in your work. Um, how does empathy look like there?
I think that the key to empathetic leadership is listening wherever you are. You know, if you land in an environment or a culture that you don't understand or that you don't know, the best way to navigate that is to listen, right? To observe, to look and listen to other people and how they're performing, how they're behaving, what they value, how they're talking, when they talk, when they don't talk. Um, you know, I when I was working in China, well, specifically in Hong Kong, but across China many years ago now, around about 2011, I didn't know because I had not worked there before that it was unspoken, but that the team would not leave the office more or less before midnight unless you explicitly told them to. So that took me months to work out why is my team there so late? Right? There's not that much work, right? Why are they sending me emails so late? What I learned over time was actually what was happening. I would go home around 8 and they'd be working. I'd go home at 8. And then in the hours between like 8 and midnight, they would relax. They would play ping pong, they would have dinner, they would listen to music or whatever they were doing. And then they would specifically send me emails as the boss at like 11:38 p.m. to show that they were still working at 11:38 p.m. Even though they had actually spent a few hours relaxing, right? They could have just gone home, but they wanted to what the Chinese call show face, right? They want to show respect. They want to show a behavior that they believe is the right thing to show. So until you learn that, you don't understand it. You're like, hang on, what is going on? Am I giving them too much work, or do they not understand the work I want them to do? Or maybe they're just really slow at their work, which I don't think is the case. So every country and culture you go into, you have to listen and often listen to the unspoken norms, the things that people aren't necessarily saying explicitly, to understand how are they working, why are they working, what does that mean? In India, for example, I mean, there is such high pressure in the Indian corporate world, right? It is such a race. It's such a race always. The pressure to perform is so high. And until you really spend time with Indians, understanding, the history of that, the size of the population, the reality of the mindset of children that grow up in India and go through the university system, you will never fully understand why that pressure exists. So, empathetic leadership looks like listening, really active, intentional listening, where you're listening to gather insight and not to respond, but to understand.
Yeah, I think so. Like you also seems to be talking a lot about listening-led leadership, right?
Yes.
You really specifically emphasize on this and also how it helps in the global work culture, right? And also, you also speak a lot about psychological safety and DIE, of course,
Mm.
as part of empathy. I think it is expected to really focus also on the diversity, equity, and then inclusion. How do you see the difference, if there is any difference, any patterns that you notice between the expats and the local ones, the ones who are working as expats? So you think that they really have a different mindset?
Look, I think it depends. I think it depends on the country where you're finding those expats. I think it depends how long that country has had expats in it and how many expats there are within it. So, for example, in Dubai, where there is a majority expat-led workforce, because there is a small local population, which means that nearly everybody in that city is an expat, and it has been like that for a long time. There's not really you can't really distinguish in the business world, for example, with psychological safety, which organizations have more or less based on expat percentages. But in a country like Kuala Lumpur, a country like Malaysia, like Kuala Lumpur, the city I live in, where there's very few expats really. The predominant culture is a Malaysian culture of either, Indian, Chinese, or Malay, depending on the organization that you're within. Then the expat, if you have an expat leader, for example, might shift the way that that psychological safety or that inclusion comes to life based on them because they are the minority, right? That expat is a minority within a very strong leading culture from that country. So I think that, Sabia, the answer depends on so many different things, depending on the countries, the cultures, the languages, and whether that expat is part of their culture. So if you are an expat in China who speaks Mandarin and has been in China for 25 years, you are far more likely to be able to lead with psychological safety and inclusion in a Chinese workforce speaking Mandarin with a Chinese workforce versus, an expat leader who comes into China having never really been there, who doesn't speak Mandarin and is trying to start out. The level of safety you can create is far less because you just can't connect in the same way.
Got it.
So I think it depends is the answer.
Yeah, but it's quite an interesting one. It really covers a lot of topics, and it just starts with listening, right? With just listening, you can really be inclusive as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can. So,
Well, from listening, I'm moving on to the groundedness, right? With, I mean, you have been on the BBC, you have trained Fortune 500, reached millions through your books and through your keynote speaking events. How do you find groundedness? I mean, it happens that, I mean, find your values in every day um, is difficult because you have access to all this, I can't say luxury, but privilege
mm,
and groundedness.
yeah.
Really that you have to strive, you have to balance it. How do you do that?
Look, I think I find I find my personal groundedness, if that's a word, in my passion, right? In, as I said, there is, for me, when it comes to the work I do in empathy, you're not going to find two versions of me. There's not like personal life Mimi and professional life Mimi or mum Mimi versus boss Mimi or any of those things, right? Literally, this is it, right? So if you go to my Instagram, don't do this, but if you did and scrolled for 5 years, it never changes. My hair color might change, but nothing else changes, right? Um, that's how I find my groundedness because I just live me. I don't try to be someone else. I don't try to, they talk about fake it till you make it on social media and stuff. I just live my life by what I believe are, my values, my choices, my family in life. I treat others how I would want to be treated. I live by empathy. I teach empathy. I try and create that everywhere I go. Um, and I think the thing is, I'm not interested in the flashiness, right? So, what I am interested in is comfort. So, making sure we have electricity and hot water, and, I can do the grocery shopping easily. We have a car that enables me to take my daughter to school. But beyond comfort, in life, being able to live a comfortable, safe life, and I've lived in countries that aren't safe, so I know what that means. That's for me, that's what's I don't know, that's what's important to me.
Yeah, well, I mean that is how it should be, right? Because it does happen that for some people, the limelight, being in different platforms, does mean that okay, they are important, and it's sometimes not that easy to balance that. Yeah,
I think that's possible. My mum always tells me this, my mum always says, make sure that however many fans you have or, however fast you grow or whatever it is, that you never forget who you are in that. So I think it's very important. You're right. I don't, but I think one can
one can.
get very easily wrapped up in it. But for me, the purpose is bigger than the means. So the purpose is to create more empathy in the world. And I don't care if that's in a palace full of gold with a Lamborghini outside or a township, with trucks selling fruit on the street. Like it doesn't make any difference to me, right? The creation of empathy is the goal there. And often I much rather be on the street than in the palace anyway.
I think it also comes down after really be traveled to different cultures.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of I think helps. But well. I'm happy that you could really have that perspective and be, because I think that sets the right stone for your daughter as well, right?
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so.
All right, then I'm moving on to the next one, which is the book that we spoke in the beginning, the upcoming book, which is the
Yep.
connection prescription. Yeah. So expat world is really a very fragile world when it comes to connection.
Yes.
This book, you explore on empathy and belonging as the key to longevity.
Mm.
Tell us more about that. How did you make this connection? I mean, I'm sure you have again noticed and observed a lot, but when it comes to expat, I think this is a very important topic and a book to read. I'm not too sure when this book is coming out, but tell us more about this book. How did you think of it?
Yeah, well, it comes out this summer. And I think that as I went through the world doing this work and teaching empathy, one of the things that again kind of came to me, I was not really looking for that, is the amount of data that backs up our need to be connected, our need to belong as human beings, not just about thriving, but actually surviving, right? The survival of the human race relies on us being connected. When we are connected, statistically, we live 8 years longer. We're more able to survive disease, recover from disease. We have stronger immunity. Um, so this next book is really taking that empathy conversation, sorry, a little bit further, taking that empathy conversation a little bit further and really looking at the role of belonging in longevity in 3 areas. One of them is longevity in leadership, so success as a leader.
Mhm.
The other is longevity in your relationships. So that part of the book is called How Many Marriages Could We Save? Like how much, could we shift our relationships at home? And then the last bit is in our health. So literally the physiological data around longevity and how we can live better for longer when we are connected.
Wow, that really covers a lot of interesting topics already. One last question. So the future of empathy and the global citizen, right? One mindset shift that you think is really needed that we need to embrace the expats, the nomads, or the returnees. What is it that one mindset shift that they need to embrace?
I think it probably comes back to our conversation today, which is that you are a stranger in another person's country. And I believe, especially from, the role of an empathy specialist, the more open and intentional you are about leaning into the culture of others, recognizing that we are guests in their nations and that that is a real gift actually. The more you can lean into the culture that you're being welcomed into, the more you can make friends outside of foreign circles and be part of culture and community. I believe the happier you will be and the longer that success as an expat will go on. So I think the mindset shift is from living a parallel life in a foreign country to really trying to live within the lives of a foreign country. And in everything I've seen in over 20 years and I don't know, about 10 countries, tells me that that is the formula for success.
Wow. I wish we could really kind of speak a lot about this topic, but I think I have really taken a lot of your time, and then I I just
We'll
wish.
have to do another one.
Sorry.
We'll have to do another one.
Maybe, yes, coming back on Rooted and Routed. Maybe why not?
Yes,
I,
exactly.
I'm really, really grateful that we did this session today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And for the ones who are tuning in and would like to check your work, I'm going to share your link of empathyeverywhere.co
Yes. Just .co, empathyeverywhere.co.
.co, and also your next book coming up, the connection prescription also. So
Yes.
I'm really, really wishing all the best for the book. And
Thank you.
I hope we'll see each other in person soon, maybe in India.
So, I really hope so. Thank you so much for having
Thank you
me,
so
and I'm sorry
much.
to rush the end. But it's been an absolute pleasure, and yeah, I hope we meet in Mumbai really soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.